So you want an early 60s style SG with the classic Maestro vibrato, but aren't willing or able to drop $2,500 on the Gibson? Well, of course, Epiphone makes an inspired by Gibson version. But is it worth buying? My dad bought a Gibson Les Paul SG not long after they first came out in the early 60s. Well, he was sold on the lightweight after playing an ES 355 for a few years, and he ended up owning a couple more SGs in the 70s and 80s. Now, in about 1970, he moved to a Gretsch Silverjet, and I was given his first SG, which I played alongside my Fenders for a while. In fact, it was my first ever humbucker guitar back then, so I'm quite familiar with the model, and I know what the originals were like. Of course, the traditional SG is an all-mahogany guitar, and this one is as well. And while I don't think anyone would expect the quality woods of the original, at least they stuck to the basic formula. Now, this veneer used on the top and back hasn't been particularly well received by everyone, but it's not hard to understand why it was done. Now, no doubt this is a multi-piece body to keep the cost down. Well, I have to say, I was put off by it when I first saw these with their very stripy tops and plain bevels. But this one actually looks okay in person. Like all the other recent Epiphones I've looked at, this has the Indian Laurel fingerboard, which I've talked about before. Now, these feel fine, but they vary quite a bit in looks. So if you're like me, you'll want to see it in person or see some very good photos to be sure it looks good to you. Now, I think this one is fine, but I've seen some that were almost a light tan color, and that's not what I want to see on a vintage-inspired guitar. Now, of course, it has the usual 24 3/4-inch scale length, a 12-inch radius, and a 1.692-inch or 43mm Graphtec nut. Now, the pickups are a pair of Epiphone Alnico 2 Pro Buckers. Now, they're wired to quality CTS pots. It has a Epiphone Locktone ABR1 style tunematic bridge and Epiphone Kluson style tuners with an 18:1 ratio, and they feel fine. So let's see how it plays and sounds, and I'll give you my final thoughts. All right, first up, some basic tones. Here's the neck pickup. And the bridge pickup. And both pickups together. Okay, let's get on to the playing demo. Well, the first big feel difference I noticed was the neck. Now, this neck feels nothing like any of the SGs I've owned. Well, that's not to say it's bad. Preferred neck shape is one of the most subjective things about any guitar, and you may love this one. I'd say this neck feels similar to many other modern Epiphones, with its somewhat chunkier shoulders and flatter back. Original SGs had 60s slim taper profiles, which had a lot less shoulder and a bit more rounded backs. Now, the frets do seem well leveled and crowned, but unfortunately, the fret ends are a bit prickly. Not sharp where you're going to cut your hand or anything, but they could certainly use some cleaning up for a more comfortable feel. Now, as I've mentioned before, this isn't difficult, but it's best done with the correct tool. There's a ton of YouTube videos on this if you're interested. So let's talk about this Vibrola, since I've heard a lot of complaints about the Gibson version. Now, I once read a quote from a very famous vintage guitar expert who said the modern Gibson Vibrola doesn't return to pitch as well as the old ones because the spring steel just isn't of the quality used back in the 60s. It's not a matter of Gibson cutting corners, but like many other things, it's simply a matter of modern availability. Now, I can't verify that claim, but it doesn't seem unlikely. I own an original 60s Vibrola because my dad loved them, and he put one on his custom-built guitar, which I now own. And he never had tuning stability issues with his. In any case, surprisingly, I've heard numerous reports of the Vibrola on this Epiphone actually returning to pitch better than most of the Gibsons. I have no idea what would account for that, but I can say this one does pretty well, so long as you understand it was never designed for anything but gentle vibrato. So, summing up, if a vintage-style SG is what you're after, I don't think you're going to do a lot better at anywhere near this price point. Only you can decide if the Vibrola is worth the extra $50 over the stop-tail version, but it does look cool, is functional, and if you're into it, well, why not? It's still a pretty budget-friendly guitar that I'd say is absolutely gig-worthy. Well, thanks so much for watching. Go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't. And if you'd like to further support the channel, well, consider becoming a patron by heading over to my Patreon page. Now, I will leave a link in the description. So take care of yourselves, and I will see you again very soon.